Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. At least this afternoon where I am. My name is Ivor Gardiner. I'm going to apologise in advance a little bit for any background interference and noise you have. I'm actually dialing in on leave from South Africa, and there are kids around the neighbourhood, so please forgive any background interference. I'm here to talk to you about the Battlegroup Wargame System. So I'm going to start here with the initial task and objectives that we were given. Now, this was a project that came to us through the Land Warfare Centre in the UK. Which leads in that area within the British Army. And the purpose was to design and develop a board war game, both boxed and print on demand, to assist staff training, deliver decision-making experience, understanding of capabilities and threat awareness, and a wargaming experience from platoon to brigade. You can see straight away from that first sentence there, that's a pretty big span of command to try and capture platoon to brigade. The game must use an open format and address rural and urban combat, as well as supporting functions such as logistics, and be verified and validated. So it was quite a big ask, and we had pretty much a year in which to develop this. With, at the end of the first year, 3 prototype games with 1 scenario to be delivered, and then within the second year, 10 final copies. Well, we came in ahead of schedule, and it went from 10 final copies to 500, which will be rolled out across the British Army. Every unit will receive at least 1 copy, regular and reserve. And it's a step. This is the closest we've ever been to having an institutionalized approach to wargaming in our armed forces, and I'll elaborate on that a little bit more. I'd also like to very quickly introduce James over there, or Jim as we call him, Jim Buckley, who's going to be talking after me. And Jim has been an integral part of my team in developing this game and really adding the professional layers to it, so it looks like a truly professional product. But the first thing we did when we looked at this, it's the what. What is the purpose of the war game? Why does it want to do this? And then looking at the how. And for the what here, the first thing we did is go back and say, look, platoon to brigade, too big a span. And we convinced them that we come down to battle group and below. So we go battle group and downwards, which was around about the sweet spot for the tactical nature of what we were looking for here. So what is BGWS? It's been developed for the British Army's Land Warfare Centre. It is an innovative, low-complexity war game designed as an educational and training tool. It's been designed to allow participants to engage in realistic scenarios, and they go through the gamut of the planning phase, the command, execution of military operations, then from company to battle group level, and ideal for organizations aiming to enhance decision-making, tactical proficiency, critical thinking within a controlled, simulation-based environment. What we do a lot of in the British Army is planning. Everybody can plan. We plan. What we have lacked is a simple, accessible, easily utilizable tool for the execute. So that is what the Battlegroup Wargame System is aiming to do. It's providing that platform to be able to run and execute on your plans. What you can see there in the photograph on the right is the final front cover box art. It's been designed by soldiers for soldiers. This is very important. The core design team, all retired or serving reserve, all retired officers, all currently serving reserve officers with decades of combined service experience. The team I pulled together here they're all war gamers as well as ex-military officers, except for James, who we brought into the team because of his involvement with the likes of Phalanx Games, professional war game production. And he's actually been a fantastic sounding board and sanity check on a lot of the things that were at risk potentially of being too complicated, and helping, as I said, to give a real professional finish to the game. There's the baby being held up at the top right. That was the beta copy that came out, and a little bit of playtesting happening at the bottom. My own background, I served as an infantry officer in the South African infantry back in the 1980s, in the British Army for over 22 years, as a commanding officer. In fact, in every role and command, I made extensive use of wargaming as a tool for educational development. And my wargaming goes back to the age of 13, which is when I also first realized I wanted to be a soldier. I've always had an interest, and I always saw the utility of wargaming carried across into the professional space. It always just amazed me that so little was made of wargaming as an educational tool within the military. So the key features of the game, it's flexible. The scenarios are all very scalable. We can support from platoon. So the scale, really, we're looking at battle group down through companies to platoons and some specialist sections. But it can cater to diverse training and educational requirements. We can scale up or down, sideways. The rules are very, very customizable. So the core rules serve as a foundation. And then there's an optional set of rules where you can layer in additional levels of complexity. So if you want to test your Casevac chain, if you want to exercise engineering operations to cross a river or to breach a minefield, or if you're looking at human relations, if you're looking at vehicle recovery, you can layer in all of that. The customizable nature of it as well means that you can respond very quickly to changes in capabilities and orbats. So, for example, when we were designing the rules for this game, 4 weeks after they started using thermite drones on the battlefield of Ukraine, we had a set of optional rules for thermite drones. So you can, in contact with developments, you can keep on upscaling and customizing the rules and the game itself to keep abreast of those. So it's very flexible in that respect. It's interactive and realistic. We follow, in the British Army, in a lot of militaries I know, the only wargaming that really gets done is what we call course of action or COA wargaming, which follows an action, reaction, counteraction sequence. My personal opinion, I've never regarded it as proper wargaming. It is not truly adversarial. It is, think of it more as a confirmatory check of your plans, because the only thing that really changes is you might change your timelines or some control measures, or you may want to change your orbats a little bit. It's not really an adversarial war game where your plan is being challenged, because the full development of understanding what the enemy is likely to do or what their worst case scenario might be has already been factored into your planning. You've dealt with that as you go through. If we did course of action wargaming as COA comparisons in the professional military, then it would be a war game. But the way we use it, because of time constraints, really, it's more of a confirmatory check. So we follow that sequence because it's familiar to the players, and it also models the dynamic battlefield environments. And we've played it in so you can alternate initiatives and responses, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And this is an umpired game, ideally, but you can play it with 2 players face to face. I have in the past designed a game called the Camley Kriegspiel, which I pretty much did in isolation rather than with a team. And the problem with that is it was too complicated. It was double blind, which really adds a time lag and needs a lot more facilitators to be able to make it happen. But what's important in this is trying to remove as much of the omniscience as possible. So we have got fog of war built into the game. It uses things like concealment or hidden initial placement, various sighting mechanics to gain information about your opponent, and some uncertainties which are built into it, which mirror the real life intelligence challenges, forcing you really to have a good intelligence collection plan. It's comprehensive learning experience that we build in. The decision making is constant. It's always made under pressure. Once they've been through turn 1, we try and introduce a house rule whereby every time there's a decision to be made, we give them 15 seconds to make that decision. So they're not checking tables and charts and working out odds and statistics and all the rest of it. They have to make an intuitive decision on the battlefield as it would be in reality, and we give them 15 seconds. And critical in any kind of educational war game, of course, is reflection and review, the after-action review at the end of it. So we build that in, and we encourage people to maximize the amount of time that they give in towards that. Now, by playing a face-to-face open game here, there is often a really good opportunity as well to engage in educational discussions, learning point discussions as you go through the play, and then pick up on some of those at the end of the game. We have designed some integrated tools for the engagement. We use real-world mapping. That is really important in all of this, and it's a key part of our design decision. I'm a hobby war gamer as well. I have numerous war games. I love hex and counter games. Hexes make it very simple in the commercial space, but we are using this as an educational tool. And what I've discovered with European, particularly officers, there's a slightly different cultural mindset I've found with our American cousins, but certainly in the British Army and very much with the engagements I've had in the European perspective, you lose credibility the minute you put a map in somebody that isn't the kind of mapping they would use for real. So you're losing a large part of your audience before you've even started, because these are not war gamers. The professional military people who are trying to engage with wargaming as an educational tool. So let's give them mapping that they would use for real, because part of it is educational. It's understanding the ground. It's reading the terrain. It also means that you, as long as you can get hold of mapping for wherever you might deploy, you can design a wargame scenario around that. So it's entirely flexible to any part of the world. The force elements as well, it's a sandbox. You can represent any combat units, command elements, support assets, each with unique statistics for combat, strength, morale, and ammunition. And there's a way we do this in the professional space, which differs very much from the commercial, where in the commercial world, as you'll see when Jim talks about what he's done with it, you want to try and put as much on those counters as possible. Because what we need is a sandbox where if I've got blue counters on the map and it's a platoon, it could be a British platoon, it could be French, it could be American, it could be Nigerian, it could be, you insert the name of partner or ally, but then you need to be able to capture the data in there that reflects their capabilities. So it can't be generic. It can't be just every infantry platoon is a combat strength of 6. So again, it allows for that sandbox, and we found a way to try and simplify that. And then the physical aids. So we've got quick start guides, scenario instructions, and detailed player aids. Now, the game has been very specifically designed to be played with a player aid. There are 8 pages of player aid, and you can step through 95% of the game just using the player aid. And a lot of that, I have to give credit where it's due, is down to Jim's intervention in helping to design those, which has really made the game truly accessible and playable. As I said, if it's too complicated, the professional military person will not use it. The golden rule throughout is, if in doubt, apply military judgment and logic. In most instances that I've umpired and seen an impasse in play, nobody's had to refer to the rule book. It's kept there as a reference document, but nobody's even opened it once. Because what we do is we ask a simple question, right? This is as realistic and as logical as possible. So if you were faced with this in reality, what do you think would happen in the real world? Or what would you do in the real world? And then we apply that. So my critical criteria in designing the game is, and I've referred to it already, is accessibility, playability, and credibility. If the game, accessibility is about how easily you can access the game, you can lay it out, you can start playing with it, how reliant on you on external factors, software packages, etc. Everything you need for this game comes in the box, and I'll show you a very quick unboxing in a minute. The other is playability. If the game is not playable, it will not be used. So the money that has been spent by the Land Warfare Centre on us designing, developing, playtesting, and rolling this game out would be wasted. But what we've found by constantly playtesting with the serving professional military, and we keep on pulse checking the development of the game and making sure that it is meeting that final point of credibility and that people engage with it and play it, we think we've reached exactly the right level. And the way the game is being used at the moment, it's being rolled out already ahead of schedule by our junior officers' tactical awareness course. So whereas in the past they had no proper execute other than an online system which was hidden within a what's the word I'm looking for here? In software. It was hidden in software packages. Sorry. This is a manual game played on maps with counters, real world maps, real world orbats, which they can very, very quickly get into. And it's passing the credibility sniff test, which is all important with a professional environment. And it was another design decision because there are some fantastic games out there that I enjoy. But if you lose credibility with a professional military audience by putting hexagonal overlays on maps that they can't replicate easily, or they can't apply to any mapping that they would use anyway, because there's a process whereby you have to try and get the scale right. We use real mapping. The other is the dice. Military officers generally tend to balk when you put a dice in front of them. They think it's turning it into a game of risk, a game of chance. So you have to make sure they properly understand the real world factors that apply, that mitigate for and against when they roll those dice. And the importance of dice is representing parts of the friction of war and how you plan accordingly. But the more different types of dice you use, I've seen some games out there that use 6, 7, 8 different types of dice, or multiple different charts and tables. And you're putting this is my personal view, please. Everything is caveated by this is my personal view, but it's from trying to engage with the professional military and introduce wargaming. The more you can remove that level of chance, make it real and grounded in the real world factors, the more you start winning the credibility battle and the more you start getting them on side. So the utility of the game, I've touched on all of these. You can design any scenario around it. You can apply any mapping, any orbats. There is absolutely no software dependence. So you can make any changes you wish to this as you go along. I've seen a game in play where somebody disagreed with one of the factors and they just house ruled it. They changed the modifier a little bit because they felt that was more credible. There's nothing to stop you doing that. It is portable. You can take it anywhere, anytime. You don't need electricity. It's truly cyberproof. There are no algorithms. I have a real problem. I play computer games as well. Some of the more complicated strategic military computer games. But I have a problem for a professional military educational tool if the factors are hidden in algorithms and all you do is plug in a bunch of, you say this is attacking that. You have no idea what happens behind the scenes in the algorithms and a result gets spat out, because the learning part comes from understanding how that happened, why it might have happened, how you can mitigate for or against in your favor. It makes it a genuine sandbox because all those points you can flex it across the mapping and orbats, anything that you like. and it is truly cost effective. So as a training and educational tool for a year and a half's development and rollout, this entire thing for the British Army and 500 box copies cost less than, from what I've been led to understand, is a single software tweak to change one of the online games over which there's no control, because it has to go away and everything within there and those algorithms has to accord with a small tweak that's being made, which makes it a lot more expensive. Again, that's not me knocking digital games. I'm not opposed to digital. I'm giving my viewpoint on the importance of these factors within the educational realm. So a very quick unboxing. There it is in its shrink wrap on the left. Forgive my photographs, they're a lot less professional looking than what you're going to see from James's presentation. There's the box opened. It comes looking like a professional product, baggies and dice in the middle. We do use 2 6-sided dice for this rather than a 10-sided. Again, because everybody has 6-sided dice, they're easy to get hold of. You get the core rulebook. You can see on the top left the optional rulebook, which brings in all those extra layers of dice. There's a 4-page quick start guide, which when we're playing with a unit for the first time, we encourage them to read. My expectation is whenever I go to a military unit and to run them through this game, nobody will have read anything. So that's the expectation that I go in with, not even the 4-pager. But if they have, it's a bonus. We tend to give them a 50-minute how to play brief, and then they're up and away, planning and rolling out. Turn 1 is always clunky. By turn 2, they're picking it up. By turn 3, we as facilitators are generally no longer required. There are 4 scenarios that come in the original box, and we're building more scenarios that are digitally accessible. So each of them comes with a scenario booklet, and then there's a sheet of 6 counters, and it's probably about 540 odd counters in the box, double-sided counters. So you're getting about 1,000 plus points of data across your counters. And I've got to be honest, I've been playing war games for a long time. The company that James identified to do the production for us here, I think these are the best, most professionally finished counters I have ever played with. They're fantastic. No sprues, no corners. They punch out easily, and they really are a joy. Top right, in that right-hand picture, what you can see is some of the support work. You've got sync matrices, you've got columns on a page, you've got a planning map. I would argue the planning maps are maybe a little bit small. It should be a full A4, but they come with the electronic thing as well. You can print them off. There are 2 maps that come with this, 2 big double-sided maps that you can join together. You've got your 8 pages of player aids, and there's 1 page of errata. There's no war game comes out, I don't think, without 1 or 2 errata following on. We've managed to get it out with the box. There's an example of the playbooks or the scenario booklets inside. We may give some mapping laydown for some of the early games. We may give pre-completed operational staff work to get people into the game more quickly. And what you can see on the right-hand side there are the force management charts where you put in the critical factors. I'll touch on that a little bit more in a minute. Very briefly on the sequence of play, we do a planning phase. You can do 60 minutes, or you can do like down at the Junior Officers Tactical Awareness course. They'll do 4 days of planning. But where in the past they did 4 days of planning and they had no execute, now they'll do 4 days of planning. They'll do a full day of execute to actually fight their plans against each other. So it's utterly variable, and use whichever planning processes that you feel are relevant to your military, to your audience. Then there's an execution phase, which we give about 45 to 60 minutes. Each game turn in play represents 30 minutes of real time in terms of the scale. So you've got a command sub-phase, takes about 2 minutes. Initiative, about 30 seconds. Action sub-phase, which is the meat of it. That's an action, reaction, counteraction process, which is around 30 to 40 minutes per turn. And then a cleanup phase. So all in all, each turn is about 45 to 60 minutes. So playable in a day for most scenarios, if you're looking about a 4-hour period of combat. The planning itself, we get them to read the special scenario instructions carefully, and we keep these short. So these are 2 pages at the most of instructions, including the player or the objective of the game. What is the purpose of this? What are the learning objectives? We give them an ORBAT, so they need to understand their ORBAT. They've got time for a bit of a map appreciation, and then they can apply any process. So it may be at a lower level tactical, you're using the 7 questions. If you're American, you might be using the MDMP, the military decision-making process. If you're NATO, you might be using COPD, the 6-step estimate, whatever it may be. This is a professional game, so there is operational staff work that goes with it, but we're trying to dramatically reduce that. I have seen divisional level operation orders that we've tried to build games for the multi-domain wargame system, which is another level that we're developing at the moment, that are 140 pages long. Having been a former commanding officer, I question anybody has time to read a 140-page op order before they even make their own plans. We're trying to minimize this to ConOps on a page, including the task organization, synchronization matrix, and a planning map for coordinating measures. That's what the force management charts look like. A little bit like what a battle group logistics officer might have. You've got your units, and it makes it for easy setup as well, because you can photocopy these. That's what from the booklet. Photocopy them, lay them out, put all your counters out on the map so you can check you've got them. It tells you what type they are. It gives you a command rating up at the top left. This is how we play in command advantage and decision advantage through the auspices of command and control ratings. The movement type, your combat strength, which is a slight abstraction, but it captures your ability to bring combat power to bear on the map, and your resilience in terms of taking losses. There's a hits column there, which is blank, because as you take hits, you record that in there in pencil. Troop quality, this captures a little bit of the will to fight, your cohesion, your training levels, how well versed you are in your weapon systems, how good your lower level command and control is, and that varies between 1 and 8. 8 being the best, 1 being, think of child militias, bandit groups, whatever you like. The capabilities column really looks at weapon systems. Now, we haven't broken this down into individual weapon systems. We're looking at their anti-personnel capabilities collectively and their anti-tank capabilities. Or if it's indirect fires, for the 81mm mortar there, for example, you've got a platoon on the map, but they bring an 81mm fire counter to bear on the map. Where ammunition matters, you have an ammunition column. And we've worked this out from our staff officer's handbook, roughly to equate to how much ammunition you can carry in the vehicle, in stowage, or on the individual, and how much you're going to burn up in a 30-minute period of fire. So if you see a white box there, each time you engage in a fire combat in a turn, you cross one of those out. If it's grayed out, you don't have sufficient carry capacity to take on that extra box. You may have ground dump supplies that allow you to enhance that. But as you start running out of ammunition, you need to think about replenishment, and you can put in a replenishment demand and arrange for your resupply vehicles to come forward, spend a period of time where you're reorganizing and rebombing, get back into the fight. But you need to plan for that. You need to start tracking it. We also capture weapons capabilities at different ranges. So maximum range of the weapon systems, short range is anything that's deemed half the maximum range given. Anything over that is long range. And each of those might have a plus or a minus on the combat strength of the firepower brought to bear. So this is where it's a sandbox, because you can change the values and the factors in all of those to represent new weapons capabilities or new orbat structures. Perhaps you've got less personnel on the ground. So for example, if you compare a British dismounted armored infantry platoon or company is probably around 90 to 100 dismounts. A Russian battalion tactical group dismounted armored infantry company is around 50 to 60, because most of their firepower comes from the BMP-3, which has got less carrying capacity for the personnel of the dismounts. Therefore, they're more brittle on the ground when they dismount, and they have less combat strength to bring to bear. So you can play games with that. And then there's an information column there where you can capture some critical bits of information, maybe about R-star capabilities or command capabilities. Or if you have your dismounted infantry from the back of a vehicle, if they're in the vehicle, you put them in that column. If they dismount, you take them off that column and you stick them on the map. So there's a lot of information that you can track at any point in time using these force management charts, but that you can also keep hidden from your opponent, protecting some of the fog of war. ConOps on a page. This is part of the professional development. My personal view at this tactical level, if they cannot fit their plan in on a single page, then they have a problem with understanding and articulating their plan. So we force them to use a single page. This comes electronically. It also comes in a hard copy for them to photocopy so they can write on it. And everything that they need to do, mission, enemy course of action they're planning against, the commander's intent, the main effort, basic scheme of maneuver, fire mission support, deception plan, and their task org at the bottom right there, which is very important, is all captured. Your schematic is on the top left. Your named areas of interest and your target areas of interest assigned to responsible call signs for them are given that little box there. And then there's a box for other notes. And what I like to use is the principles of the nature of the operation of war that you're carrying out. So you can check your plan against those principles, and it helps them to understand their doctrine. So hence enhancing it as a professional development and educational tool. Then there's the planning maps. We give them to them in A4 size. And this is where all your control measures go. Clearly, you don't want your enemy to be able to see this. So your boundary lines, your NAIs, your TAIs, things like minefield objectives. If you start with hidden initial placement, you may place someone there. All of that you track on there. And what is very important, of course, is in the professional military world, is we have to have control measures to prevent the likes of fratricide. So you'll have intercompany boundaries, interplatoon boundaries. You can't fire across those. Those are restricted fire lines or no fire lines. And you need to monitor and track that as you're playing the game. So they constrain you, but as only right and proper, because that's the real world being reflected in the game. And a synchronization matrix, orders matter. In the professional military, unlike with a lot of the commercial wargaming I play, where I do anything that I feel like doing at any point in time, because I'm not necessarily bounded by orders. I can change my mind, I can change my plan, I'm more omniscient. What they have to do is capture their task org on the left, and that is how they activate. So I'll activate according to their task org. And it's truly a team sport. So, every one of those task lines that you see there could be a separate player within your team. You as the commander activate them, they carry out the orders that they've been given. So as long as what they're doing is in the spirit of the order, they can do whatever they like. You can see there for the one platoon group, for 2 turns, i.e. 1 hour of real time, they've been told to advance to a certain location. On the 3rd turn, so an hour and a half in, they've got to seize that location. And then for the next hour and a half, they need to hold that. But they have a contingency order given in brackets underneath, which is to be prepared to attack to deny a spot height or a hill feature. And we've taken the 150 odd facts verbs that are in our staff officer's handbook and condensed them into those orders that you see there on the player aid, because really we feel that those are sufficient to capture most operations that a commander at the battle group and below level will be carrying out within the realms of the game. It's not a limiting factor. If you want to add another order in there, you're more than welcome to do it. You need to understand what the definition is in the staff officer's handbook, because that's our doctrine, and then you can write it in and apply it. But it's not more complicated than that. But what is important is that when a commander at whatever level is activated to do something on the map, they have to do it in accordance with the orders they've been given and the control measures that are in place. And that's all the operational staff work they need to produce. There are, of course, in any war game, there's no perfect war game. There are always going to be abstractions. In these, it's about time, because there's that semi-simultaneity of the action-reaction that you'll see. And I'm happy to take questions about it later. But basically, if you have command advantage, you get to decide first. You activate one part of your ORBAT to do something. Then it goes to your opponent. They react by activating something. At one point in every turn, and this is where the command advantage piece comes in. So you had decision advantage, you get to go first. Command advantage is at any point in time, you can use your command rating to activate that number of your force elements under command. So that's how I can achieve simultaneity on the battlefield at any one point in time. So if I'm a company commander and I want to activate my artillery support and 2 platoons to do a 2-up attack in a single stage or subphase within the action reaction, I can do that. I can only do it once per turn. It's my span of command being slightly limited. But you can see if you've got a command rating of 1, it means you're exercising very, very centralized command. You don't have mission command, delegation of authority downwards. You're more controlling. There's less you can achieve. If you've got a command rating of 3, it speaks to greater levels of trust going down the subordinate chains of command and your ability to exercise that mission command. So time is the one, that semi-simultaneous activity within the action-reaction subphase. Location, what you see on the map there is a counter, but of course, this is not Napoleonic warfare, so we're not talking hollow squares. What they need to get their head around the fact is that that infantry platoon, let's say we're talking about 1 platoon A company of the 1st Battalion down here, that is a platoon of infantry with modern weapon systems. They're probably covering a frontage of 500 meters. So they are spread out. Where you place your counter reflects the center of mass. So if I place it in a wood line, that means I'm in that wood line and I'm indicating it's such, but I am spread out. You got to think very carefully then if you're on a forward slope of a hill or a rear slope of a hill, where you put that counter will matter. And then finally, combat strength. And I've already talked to the force management chart, so the slight abstraction that comes within combat strength. The player aid, I said, and I'm going to rattle through this very quickly so that we've got time then for, that'll take us to about 35 minutes. And we've got time for some Q&A before I hand over to Jim. But we really wanted a game that could be played just using the player aid because of those purposes of accessibility and playability I spoke about earlier. So I'm going to rattle through it very quickly. You get the sequence of play broken down, how you do the initiative test, the importance of morale, because morale matters here, and how you measure that. There is a morale check table. There's a morale effects table. So different levels of suppression, disruption, or being broken will affect you and your levels of recovery. There's the orders table for use taken from the Staff Officer's Handbook. Movement is very clearly and simply broken down there. Again, the movement rates within a 30-minute period of time are taken from our doctrine, from our Staff Officer's Handbook. Then there's a section there on how to do direct fire, indirect fire, how you apply hits, what happens if you're mounted in a vehicle, if it takes hits. Direct fire modifiers on the top left, indirect fire modifiers on the bottom left, and then your fire results table, which is either based on your combat strength or it's based on the weapon systems you're using. So if you're using direct fire weapon systems, you use your combat strength. If you're using anti-tank missiles, indirect fires, airstrikes, attack helicopter strikes, you use the italicized values in brackets, and your results are obviously, it'll be clearly understood to any war gamers out there, which I assume is all of you, is that you can be suppressed or you can take casualties. And if you take casualties, you will have a suppression level as well. And if you're under different calibers of artillery fire, you will also take automatic suppression levels, even if you take no casualties. The assault is probably the most important part of the game. This is the close with and kill the enemy piece. It is not something to be thrown around willy-nilly. If you do, it tends to end very, very badly. And this is based on odds, pure odds, dismounted odds. There are a whole lot of column shifts that then apply. We think of these as the force multipliers. Have you got armor supporting you in the assault? Have you suppressed your enemy? Have you got your commander's headquarters, TAC headquarters helping to direct the assault? Have you had supporting fires, etc.? Sighting, so there are some simple line of sight checks because when you're using real world mapping, intervisibility checks can be complicated. And then we play electronic warfare into this as well. And I know Jan Heinemann, who invited me onto this in the first instance when I met him over at a NATO meeting, was very interested in how we did the electronic warfare. So the eighth part of the chart is just the electronic warfare effects. What you see there is the game being used at Sandhurst, third-term officer cadets. And they now want us to develop the game down to platoon commander and below level for Sandhurst, but they are using it already in third-term cadets. And most recently with the 1 Scots Guards, who are re-rolling to a new capability, they want to start using the war game for testing their RORBAT, testing their understanding of the doctrine. And they're going to be the leaders within their brigade, which is 7 Light Mech Brigade, to now help take the wargaming and roll it out across the brigade. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is me. I think if there are any questions, I'm very happy. I'll shut that down now. Not sure how I come out of it. There we go. In slides. And very, very happy to take any questions. So EW effects is a question I've been asked. Electronic warfare on the battlefield. Now, if you look at our optional rules, we go into a lot more detail with electronic warfare. But what we do with electronic warfare in this game is very simple. There are certain activities you carry out on the map whereby you have to record a transmission in that turn. And really we're thinking about not every transmission, not every sighting report, not every contact report, but what is the enemy really trying to find out about you? They want to know where your command and control nodes are. They want to know where your gun lines are, and they want to know where your logistics nodes are. So when we have activity that involves any of those, you record a transmission against your own side. Also, if you inadvertently cross boundaries, you get penalized with transmission as well. If I see a commander activating one of his call signs and then start micromanaging and meddling, I charge them a transmission cost because now they're micromanaging and they're going to have to get on the net to do it. So they have to think very carefully about stepping back and allowing mission command. And if at the end of a turn, or at the start of a new turn, when you're doing the administrative phase, this the command subphase, each side blindly draws an EW chit. These are double-sided. There's a green side where you can apply that in your favor, and there's a pink side where you can apply it against your opponent. These may be positive or negative modifiers to finding things or bringing down indirect fires. They may be jamming opportunities. But if you've set off more transmissions than your opponent in a single turn, they get to draw a second chip for every 3 or increment of 3 additional transmissions that you've set, because what you're doing is you're giving a bigger electronic signature of your side to your opponent. So it's a very, very simple way of playing it. It adds some uncertainty. And then if you play in the optional rules, we bring in additional layers of complexity to that, such as, we tend to go, we know some of our adversaries have far better EW capabilities than we do. So what we might do is say they don't need to have EW represented on the map, they will automatically draw. But if you're playing blue, you get EW call signs to use on the map, and you have to make sure they're properly configured and triangulated to be able to deliver the EW effect. And if you lose any of that, you lose your EW capability. Hopefully that answers the question. Thanks, Chris. Any more? Gary, scalability. Were there particular aspects of that which caused problems to be overcome? There was initially, Gary, first of all, of course, they wanted us to do brigade down to platoon. Brigade takes you to a very different level. You can play the game as a brigade. You can have a brigade headquarters. They can give orders, but you'd need to triple up the amount of maps. You'd need to triple up your rollback. It would be a lot more time consuming. And also what we find is the sweet spot for timing works better battle group and downwards. So we are designing a game called the multi-domain wargame system. Very similar in all those approaches, except it is brigade, division, up to corps, plus all the multi-domain spectrum. We develop in the naval game, the air game, and the full multi-domain spectrum. And we tend to play 24-hour turns or longer. So the scale worked very well at battle group and below. But again, you get down to platoon. So we have specialist sections, your anti-tank sections, recce sections, the rest of it. But what we felt is that it was taking it into too much and too fine a level of detail. For this game, we went down into sections and fire teams. And that's what we're going to be designing for Sandhurst now, as the next iteration of the game, which will be unimaginatively probably called the Platoon Wargame System. It does what it says on the tin, where we will be looking down. We'll be playing at a far higher level of detail on each map, and possibly with aerial photographs, but down to the section and fire team level. Other than that, there were no real issues with scale. We play tested through all of this to make sure that it worked and it passed the credibility test. And I think what we have is fit for purpose. Within the imperfections of any war game, of course. As I said, there is no perfect war game. Thanks, Gary. Any more? No more questions. Great. Thank you very much. It's my real pleasure to hand over to Jim, or James, as he comes up on your screen. We've got a lot of Jameses who worked on this project, so we had to scale that. James Buckley became Jim, but Jim's been a pivotal part of the team. Jim is helping us with the multi-domain wargame system as well, and was really excited to see how he's taken the Battlegroup Wargame System and started to scale it into the commercial space. And I'm not going to steal any of his sandwiches, so I'll hand over to Jim now, and I'll be on at the end once he's finished. So if there are any questions pertaining to the sort of link up between the professional wargame system and the more commercial, then I'm happy to take questions in. But thank you very much for your attention so far.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so if I'm happy if you ask your questions during the presentation. If Chris puts them onto the screen, that'll be absolutely fine. My name is James Buckley. I am the founder of Sapper Studio, which is a board game design and development studio serving both professional and hobby gamers. So I don't work for Vedette, but as I'm associate partner of Vedette, and as Ivor said, I work with them on BGWS. So I'm going to talk to you now about how I'm trying to transition BGWS to a hobby game called Battlegroup Clash Baltics. So first of all, when we talk about why do I want to do this? Well, I've seen Littoral Commander, and we all have, and I think there's a market out there now. It's shown there's a market for hybrid professional and commercial games. And essentially, I don't think there's a game currently that addresses what BGWS does in the hobby space. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the ability to do the requirement to do planning, orders, the sync matrix, and really to focus in a lot on electronic warfare and drones. I don't see anything in the hobby space that does that. In the commercial space, in the professional space, there obviously are things like BGWS, but I believe there's a gap for this crossover game to fulfill that role as well. And so I'll talk a bit later on about how I'm trying to achieve that. And also, if you're familiar with designing hobby games, which maybe you are, maybe you aren't, it requires a lot of work. It's harder to do a hobby game than a professional game, I believe, having been involved in both of them. There's a lot more considerations around the production restrictions and challenges. The games have to be better looking, frankly. The production has to be better. The games generally have to be better developed. The rule book has to be better. You can't rely on umpires, and it needs to be more balanced. So it's actually quite hard to develop a hobby game. But with BGWS that already existed, I saw that there was actually a market. Well, not a market, sorry, not a market. There's already like the design fundamentals had been made by us in the process developing that I was able to use and allowed me to kind of like bring the game to market a lot quicker than otherwise would have been the case. So that's why I'm trying to create Battlegroup Clash Baltics. So what is the process for that I went through for trying to get this hobby version made of a professional game? Well, the first thing I needed to do was get an agreement with Ivor and Vedette around, well, what would it look like? What are going to be the commercial considerations that we both have to pay attention to? I won't go into details of those, obviously, because they're commercial, but we came to a place quite early on where we were both happy about what was expected of each party, of Vedette and of Sapper. But getting that right and getting it on paper, first of all, was important because there's money involved. And then obviously going along, I've been thinking throughout when I've been working on BGWS about, as a developer, about what I would add, remove, or alter to the BGWS base game, and I'll talk about that on the next slide. And then also really important early on were what are my initial production decisions, because this is a commercial game. Vedette aren't funding it in any kind of way, so all the money would come from me. I'm a sole trader, Sapper Studio. So getting the production right is really important, and that's about, where do I get it printed? What it's going to look like? How many counter sheets? How many maps do I need to get printed? How many rule books? What type of paper quality? Because you need to kind of have those decisions made, I believe, particularly for a hobby game, before you can actually begin designing the game. That they're kind of, one drives the other. So I can't make a game which involves 8 maps and then I get the quote from the various printing houses and find out that it's just not credible to do that, or there's not big enough boxes, they can't make boxes certain sizes. There's all these things. So I really early on, a decision I had to make, and everyone does when you're making a commercial game, is what does the production look like? So another key decision is, do I get it printed in Europe or China? I've gone for the EU, and I actually knew early on that I wanted to get it done in the EU, and that's had nothing to do with the tariffs. This decision was made quite a long time ago, and it's more to do with the fact, well, one, I wanted it closer to home. I don't want to have to travel over various seas and having to deal with people very far away. But also, frankly speaking, I don't want to make a business decision which funnels money to China when they're supporting Russia in the war against Ukraine. So I know we all fund China with what we do, buying certain purchases, but I didn't want to do that with this game. So I had made a decision to do it in Europe, but that has more costs which you have to think about. So I've had to get quotes from various companies for that. So they were the first steps that I went through, and that happened in the first month or two after I reached agreement with Vedette that I was going to make the game. And then on to the kind of like the bread and butter of what we've been talking about when I've been making the game. So what needed to change and what needed to remain compared to what you just heard about from Battlegroup Wargame System. So this is on the front box of Battlegroup Clash, you'll see that it says system designed by Ivor Gardiner, game designed by James Buckley. And that's because this is using the BGWS system. And that's really important. I was involved in that system, and I like it. I think it's a really great system, and I wanted to use it for this game. So I wanted to keep the general sequence of play. I wanted to keep the orders and the sync matrix, because I think that's what makes Battlegroup Clash, one of the two reasons Battlegroup Clash is different from other hobby war games, is because it has that. Another thing is I wanted to keep a grid-based map. I didn't want to use a hex-based map. And that's for the reasons that Ivor said as well. A hex-based map is probably fine for hobby gamers, but I also want to appeal to professional gamers, and a grid-based map gets you there. I also think it actually gives you more freedom. I sometimes play miniature games, and I think it allows for a bit more freedom in what you can do. So I wanted to keep a grid-based map, and you'll see an example of what that looks like in a second. And I wanted to keep the combat results tables that we have in BGWS. They've been VMV'd. I trust they come out, but I have simplified them a bit because there's quite a few entries in BGWS. So I wanted to simplify that a bit. What did I want to change? Well, BGWS is playable without an umpire, but it's really an umpired game. But obviously for a commercial game, it can't. There's no umpire. So I needed to make sure that the rules were very tight. As Ivor said in his presentation, he has a golden rule of if in doubt, apply military judgment. Well, that's just not going to cut it for a hobby game. A lot of the people don't have that military judgment, and they don't expect that from a commercial game. They want to know the answer. So I need to be a bit kind of tighter around all the rules. I can't rely on judgment, and particularly on the maps, as you see on the next slide, I can't use OS maps in the same way that BGWS uses. You'll see on this slide, there's images of two counters, and there's the BGWS counter and what the counter looks like in Battlegroup Clash Baltics. Now, this is the same element, 1A1 infantry platoon, but all the information that BGWS has on its force management chart, I've decided needs to go on the counter, and that's because as a hobby gamer, or even for most professional gamers, it distracts quite a lot to have to always go back to a force management chart to check the details, and then go back and forward and back and forward. So for a game that's going to have commercial appeal, I decided that just wasn't really something that was going to cut it and be popular with commercial customers. Now, the problem with this is that, as Ivor said, it doesn't give you the flexibility that BGWS does. So this 1A1 unit is always going to have a combat strength of 7 and a troop quality of 6, whereas you can adjust it upwards and downwards, obviously, with BGWS. But that's a decision I decided to make. So everything's on the counter. Another change was that, again, as Ivor said, that BGWS uses this concept of action, reaction, counteraction, but I wanted to kind of move away from that. I feel less bound by that because it's not a game that's being sold directly to the army, so I don't feel bound by having to follow that. And I think it's probably, in my system, you can avoid the counteraction step of it just within the action reaction. It kind of just streamlines the process a little bit. I also got rid of the concealment rules. I was a bit unhappy about having to do that, but the concealment rules had a few kind of like extra. It's not just one extra rule; it has consequences for other rules, which create quite a bit of extra bandwidth and time to resolve. And I decided it was something that I could afford to lose, particularly because, like, this setting is Baltics next year after, and my thesis for the game is there's not much that's concealed in the modern day UAS, so I could afford to lose that rule. So that's something that I've changed. And then in terms of adding, what I've added, well, I really wanted to put a lot more emphasis on drones and EW, even than BGWS has. The BGWS introduces more of that as optional rules. I wanted it as kind of the core rules, really big focus on drones and EW, and I can answer what's different about that in my game shortly, but that's a big emphasis on that. Also on, sorry, I just lost my screen. Also on replayability. So the game has a variable victory conditions for each scenario. You roll a dice on a table, it tells you what your first one, you roll a dice and tells you what the second one is, because people are going to be playing this a lot, and if they know what the opponent's objective is straight away, they can change their battle plans next time around that. So I wanted to avoid that by introducing some randomness. And finally, I wanted to have a learning pathway. So the basic game is like a standard kind of hobby game, doesn't use planning, doesn't even have morale. But it really introduces the game. You could play it at a club night, having a few beers, enjoying yourself. Yeah, we'll talk about counters in a second, Paul. They should be big enough, but we'll see. Standard Rules is the game that I originally designed based on BGWS. It's got morale, it's got the preparation, the phase, the sync matrix, and then I moved into the advanced, what I call advanced mode, things like ammo management. So ammo management is a core part of BGWS. In my game, it's only in the advanced mode because it kind of like slows the play down quite a lot of it when you've got to manage that, when you've got to handle replay dems. I wanted to keep it, but it really does slow it. So looking at the game, you could play like the basic, a standard kind of scenario in basic mode in 2 to 3 hours. You could play this kind of like standard scenario in standard mode in maybe 4 hours. And then advanced mode, I think it's going to take you 5 or 6. So you can see it's going to take longer and longer and longer because you're doing more and more stuff in each. On to design choices particular. So maps. So like I said, I wanted to use grid maps. I think it differentiates the game from other hobby war games, breaking free from the tyranny of hexes. But the trouble with OS maps is they are hard to pass if you're not a military person, and they do rely on judgment or an umpire. So I can't rely on that in this game. So what I did instead was that I got the map that I wanted, and then I used a professional illustrator to draw, sort of like use computer software to recreate the map using a Google Maps image. And then I worked with him to design the terrain to make it easier to play with. It's still based on terrain. So this map is this map you see in front of you here is for one of the scenarios called the attack on Pertsa Bridge. This road, the E20, is the main road between Russia and Tallinn. And I was speaking with a former British Army officer whose son is in the fire support team in a British battle group based in Estonia, and he said, like, this is basically where Russia will come in to get to Tallinn. They'll come on this road. So we talked about where would be a good map to use for that. Took that map from Google Maps, took an image, gave it to the illustrator. He produced this map, and then with another graphic designer, I've now worked on that so that around each of the main terrain areas there's a small line, which you can't see on this presentation, but there's a small line which allows you, if there are any kind of issues around, well, are you in that terrain or aren't you? Actually, the line defines where you are. So it should resolve kind of like some of the ambiguities that you get with an OS map. It's not as clean as a hex map, but it brings a lot of kind of realism, and the map looks really good. And you have to like work off grid coordinates now. Which I think people will be quite attracted to. So that's what we've done for maps. And for counters, as I talked about, I've gone for a more traditional hex and counter style approach. So again, on BGWS, you have the FMC. On here is all on the counter. So you can see like the green on the top is your anti-personnel weaponry and the modifiers, and the purple is anti-tank. And then the star tells you if it's an I-star asset or not, the CT rating. So it's all kind of captured on the counter. And what you do is when you take a hit, you flip the counter, so it goes to its lower strength side. And if you take another hit, you put in a different counter, which has got steps 3 and 4. So it uses a step-based approach. And the the Russians have only got 3 steps, and the blue have got 4 steps because of the reasons that Ivor said earlier, which is like the a NATO company is going to have more soldiers per platoon than the Russian equivalent. Playtesting. So I don't have the benefit that we had with BGWS of being able to go out to different army units and test it with them. Rather, I've been using Tabletop Simulator, and you'll see what it looks like in a second. And I've managed to pull together a group of 10 playtesters from a variety of sources: Fight Club, LinkedIn, subscribers to the game's product page. I've been reaching out to them. And I've been lucky to get professional hobby and SME, which is really quite important because I need all of those things to make sure it works for the different areas. I've been running the process through both email and Discord, and on TTS you can play against each other wherever you are in the world. So that's been working very well. Been getting feedback and discussion generated via Discord. And the output's been really great from the play testing, and it was because of the feedback I was getting from hobby gamers that are struggling a bit with things like their sync matrix, that I went down the basic, standard and advanced mode. And again, improvements to the map and the rule book. So the idea of putting the lines around the train came from a playtester. And then also one of the playtesters happens to be an intelligence officer in the British Army. And he spoke to me about, how we capture red and blue doctrine. So this is not in BGWS, because in BGWS, you'll do it yourself as part of your plan. But for a hobby game, you can't rely on people doing that. So it's actually built into the mechanics in the advanced mode, where blue gets to get reserves, which red do not have. Actually, red have the opposite. Red are more stymied in the advanced mode. They have to follow. You have to follow your sync matrix no matter what. You cannot follow. You can't change from that. But you get additional artillery and FPVs. Like the red FPVs are very powerful in the game, and the red electronic warfare is a lot more powerful than blue in the advanced rules. So what's the next steps for the game? The core mechanics I'm pretty happy with being done now. I've got one more map to be made and generating scenarios for based on the maps. So more playtesting to happen with that. I have some components decisions still to make around, for example, do I want to use cubes to mark if they've done moved or fired or hold, rather than markers and little wooden cubes, because that might reduce some of the clutter on the board. I need to get final quotes and pricing. So when you get a quote from a production company, that will last typically 4 months. So I need to get my final quotes from production company, launch pre-orders and close those within 4 months and get the order sent to the production company to stay within that quote, so they don't change their prices at all. And the production run that I'll go for, 500, 750, 1,000, will be based on final pre-order numbers that come through. And finally, just some components and player aid examples. These are still prototype, but the component sheets have been made because I'm having prototype copies made. Again, the player aid's still being iterated, but you can see what it's broadly going to look like. It's quite similar to the BGWS one, to be honest, but for example, with movement, we've got actual images of what the different terrain looks like that you'll be passing on the map. Here's an example of like the big monster scenario in the game. So each map is 600 millimeters, 60 millimeters by 880 millimeters. This double map scenario is 2 maps put together. This will be like optional because not many people have got a 1.7 meter long table. But if you do, you can play a double theater map, and that'll be really cool. That'll be a whole battle group with 2 different theaters going on. Red's trying to get reinforcements, and that would be how the game would work at a sort of 6-player game, 6-player count. But then you could also just imagine 2 maps separately, and there's 2 separate scenarios for that. And just to give you an example of what the game kind of like is looking like based on what you see in Tabletop Simulator. At the moment, this is like turn 2 of like a basic scenario where the Reds have on the left, they've inserted a force by amphibious landing to hold this important bridge over this River Pertsey. And then they've got a vanguard force trying to relieve that force while blues are trying to interdict them. But they've all got, depends which objective you're going for. But in this one, blue have got to try and claim the hills and dislodge the task group, and red have got to try and stop them. So you build your sync matrix around that. So that's the summary of the game at the moment. If you want more information, you can go to the Battlegroup Baltics product page on sapperstudio.com, or subscribe to the Board Game Geek page, or contact me. And just a little bit about Sapper Studio. I set it up last year. I was head of development at Phalanx, a hobby board game publisher. But with working with Vedette, I saw that there was a space actually for someone to do for professional games what hobby war games have been doing very well for a long time, which is improving the user interface, making games flow better, improving the production quality. And so that's what Sapper Studio is really all about. But also I'm now moving into game publishing with Battlegroup Clash. So that finishes my presentation, and happy to answer any questions. Okay, so you might want to bump the font size of the counters. So this is where you're coming into, I have looked at that. Okay, so what we're talking about, I've got platoons and sections, and I have been looking at doing the sections smaller and the platoons bigger. The thing is, if you have different size counters, it creates a bit of an issue when you have a stack of them. That's one issue. Another issue is that it just doesn't actually look very realistic on the board, to be frank. And finally, it's this production cost issue. So let's say I've got 80 or 90 counters for units. If they're 25 mil, that is I need more counter sheets for that, which has quite a large consequence for the cost of the game. So I get that a lot of games that people like, I've got 25 mil and that they're great. I like that as well, but it has a bunch of consequences that I have to consider. But noted, and I will think about that. At the moment, the counters are 20 mil. How do you handle weather and change the time of day and spotting combat? I don't know if that's aimed at me or Ivor. In my game, the weather is an optional rule, and the main weather effect really is on how far you can see. So line of sight, you can't target in the game unless your recce can target 4 kilometers, which is 4 grid squares. Everyone else can target 3 kilometers away, or you've got UASs. Let's have a look. If you look at this image here, you can see the round one, probably if you look to the right, about 2 grid squares in, there's that round unit. That's the UAS. That can provide line of sight as an I-star unit to all 4 grid squares adjacent to it. So UAS are less effective in bad weather. And if you don't have any I-star, you can't fire your off-board 152, 155, 220 or your FPVs. So that's how I handle weather. It doesn't have any effect on combat. I will have to step in. I can't remember for BGWS. I think it does.
Yeah. No, I'm happy to jump in on that, Jim, because obviously weather plays a very big effect on any military operation. For the base game, for the core scenarios as they stand, weather is limited. Although one of the scenarios is a night scenario, which has an impact on visibility, intervisibility. But we do, in the optional rules, we go into detail on weather. So, and clearly, you can think effects, for example, of particularly heavy rain. There might be flooded areas close to rivers. You might have very restricted to no movement for certain vehicle types, particularly heavy wheeled, off-road. You will have impact on artillery. In other words, it's going to be less effective because a lot of the blast may be absorbed by boggy fields. So, and visibility will be affected by rain, heavy rain, mist. If it's extremely dry, with real ammunitions, tracer has a tendency to set particularly dry, burnable terrain on fire. I've seen that firsthand many times. So we play that in as well. And you can decide on when you're revisiting or you're designing a scenario or you play one of the existing scenarios and you say, right, let's see what happens if we layer in the weather here. It's extremely dry or extremely wet. Let's bring these in. We've got optional rules for paradrops, for example, limited utility that airborne forces in conventional warfare have today, but we have them in there. And, in certain strong winds or the rest of it, you're going to get drift or you may not be able to drop at all. So we do play weather into quite a detailed level in the optional rules. Yeah, that's a good point, and that probably I think talks more to the Baltic Clash, Jim. But with the multi-domain wargame system for the land units that we're developing, which tend to be Battlegroup Brigade and above, we color code them by formation for both sides, both the red and the blue, but not with the basic system where you really got it, and the counters are large enough to be able to read the. It's one of the advantages, I suppose, of not putting counter values on a counter, but keeping them on a separate chart where you track them. Is the nature and the size of the font size. You can increase it or decrease it as you suit. But I can see the point you're making. What it means is that with those counters, they're all just black on blue or black on red. But with Jim's counters, which are significantly more appealing to the eye, you've probably got more to say on that one, Jim.
I'm not quite sure. So which unit is on which aid sheet? I think that's talking about your FMC, maybe. Unless I'm misunderstanding.
It could be. Is there any clarity to the question, Paul? Probably not. So if it is talking about the force management charts, as I said, I think one of the design decisions and what is an important part of the execute of the game is the fact you can play one-to-one, face-to-face, or as a team sport. It works best to me as a team sport. Let's say you are commanding a company and you've got 3 platoon groups and you've got a mortar platoon attached and you've got a fire support team attached, you've got some off-board artillery, you've got your log element, you've probably got about 7 different commanders that you can activate there to do something. What we also tend to do is say, have a battle group log officer who's monitoring all that off track on the force management charts, like you would do for real, and have an intelligence collection officer who's continually monitoring the enemy, working out assessments, trying to work out who they are, what their intent is. But if you have a multiple team like that, you know where your force elements are. You don't need to be able to pick it out through different color coding and all this. We've tried to keep the counter density on the map low as well. So we haven't found that to be a problem. The biggest scenario that we play in that is a full battle group or a full BTG, battalion tactical group. And if each person is commanding a company, really they don't forget where their force elements are. Bearing in mind as well that we play with inter-company and inter-platoon boundaries. So you're completely attuned to your part of the map where your area of responsibility is.
One thing that we did to address that problem as well with I've done Battlegroup Clashes, you can actually see optionally there's like little, you put next to the main task group, actually there's a little counter that says task group 1, task group 2, task group 3, and that's actually on the map. So that allows you to easily see, okay, I've got to look at my sync matrix, task group 1, where is task group 1? Well, actually you can just see where task group 1 is because it's just, there's actually a counter that says task group 1 next to the counters. So again, from a hobby perspective, that kind of makes it a bit easier for the players.
Yeah, Gary, thanks for that question. We've had an enormous amount of feedback. The most negative feedback we got with JOTAC was 6% people who were not happy, which from a professional military audience where you have a lot of naysayers about wargaming, we thought was fantastic. We had a 76% positive feedback on the first series of play tests. First of all, about the quality and the impact of the decision-making, and also about them properly, finally understanding different roles and responsibility on the battlefield, because this is something they never get to do. If you run a CHOOT, a tactical exercise without troops, or you're having a conversation about a phase of war, it's all very discursive. But when you're actually maneuvering that stuff on the map and you're seeing outcomes from your decisions, it really starts to resonate with that audience. So our feedback, and as I said, all of our play testing was done with the professional military. That play test feedback was so positive that the Junior Officer Tactical Awareness course jumped on this 4 months ahead of it actually being released, and 4 months ahead of the rest of the army, to say we want to start using this now. Gave them everything electronically. They started to produce their own maps and counters, gave them the scenarios, ran them through some facilitation, and they're now using it twice per course for execute. So to be honest with you, I have found the feedback to be more positive than I'd hoped, even having spent more than 22 years struggling to try and get people to understand that wargaming is an excellent tool for professional military education and development. I think the penny's finally starting to drop.
That one's probably for me. Should players commercial game make decisions in 50 seconds too? No. I wouldn't. It's up to you. You want to play that way, you can, but I wouldn't expect that to be the case in the commercial game. Certainly, there's no rule about it.
I guess that's for me, having spent most of my adult life in the British Army. Yeah, so I really struggled. I ran a wargaming symposium when I was a commanding officer back in 2013, which was, we had over 120 commanding officers, brigade commanders, heads of branches and departments over 2 days at Shrivenham. It was a fantastic, I put it down as a strategic success because the level of enthusiasm with people when they left that symposium was fantastic. But it was a tactical success, strategic failure. And the reason I say that is because it was never institutionalized. And if it's never institutionalized, it's only ever going to be a passion project for those who really believe in its utility. And as soon as they move out of command, the next commander comes in, they've got their own imperatives, and it'll fade away. And I've seen that happen over and over again. The second Army Wargaming Symposium, which we ran 2 years ago, led to the Battlegroup Wargame System. It came off the back of that. And this is the first time I'm seeing it be institutionalized. And if it's not institutionalized, it's only ever going to be that passion project. So we're heading in the right direction. How do you make it institutionalized? To me, it's got to have top level buy-in. So you need that 3-4 star level to say, this is going to happen. It's got to be part of the syllabus and we have to bring it in. And then I think the passion and the enthusiasm will come from the younger carders as they're coming through, as they start to get to grips with it, as they see how it helps them better understand their profession, their trade, and how to do their job better. And they will start bringing in the fire that we need to then do it from the ground up build. So it needs top level buy-in and institutionalizing to bring it into the system. And a lot of those guys and girls don't get wargaming. I had a 2-star general saying to me, I don't believe in wargaming. It's just going to take away money from training, whereas it should be complementary to training. But if we get it in, and young officers and young enlisteds, because we're now designing it for the NCO Academy as well, see the utility that it brings to bear and how it enhances their professional advantages, they will bring the fire and the passion to keep it going. As we stand right now, every young officer goes through the Junior Officer Tactical Awareness course. They all go back to their units. So we're starting to build the filters to carry that back to their units and to carry on helping the units then roll out the Battlegroup Wargaming System across their organizations. I'm really optimistic and hopeful. If we can't get it right at this point now, and with the stars aligning, it's never going to happen. Thanks, Gary. Chris, looks like that might be it.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm not sure how many out there, but for your time and attention, much appreciated.